When an unassuming elderly woman arrived at the wedding, the bride's family said she smelled like a maid. But by the end of the night, they'd be begging her for forgiveness. The summer afternoon bathed the hillside estate in a golden haze, like light filtered through glasses of chilled white wine at an elite celebration. Ancient olive trees swayed gently in the breeze, casting dappled shadows over the marble pathway leading to a grand ivory mansion. Nestled among blooming rose gardens and the soft murmur of a circular fountain. It was the setting for what many called the wedding of the year. Guests strolled across the polished stone courtyard, silk gowns trailing behind them, Italian leather shoes peeking beneath perfectly pressed trousers. The air shimmered with laughter, soft clinks of champagne glasses, and the faint trail of designer perfume. At the heart of it all stood Olivia Montgomery, the stunning bride, and her soon-to-be husband, Michael Carter. Their love story had long been whispered about in high society. Olivia, the daughter of a powerful business family. Michael, a self-made entrepreneur whose success had inspired countless others. And then, a battered old sedan rumbled past the wrought iron gates, coughing once before its engine fell silent, drawing curious glances. The door creaked open. An elderly woman stepped out. Her silver curls framed a kind, time-worn face. Warm brown eyes swept over the gathering with a gentle smile. She wore a deep blue dress, faded at the sleeves, with a few loose threads at the collar. Her flats were worn, the straps a little uneven. There was no perfume cloud around her, only the unmistakable scent of old kitchens, wood smoke, aged cooking oil, and the musty trace of floral aprons hung too long in forgotten cupboards. That woman was Evelyn Carter, and she had just stepped into a world of crystal chandeliers and social expectations, bringing with her the unpolished scent of a past no one here cared to remember. Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother, was mid-toast with a circle of VIP guests when the shift occurred. Her manicured brows twitched. She discreetly covered her nose in a way that was both subtle and obviously staged. Tilting her head, she whispered just loud enough for neighboring tables to hear, "Did someone forget to close the kitchen door?" Then, turning with a knowing smirk as Evelyn passed by, "Or did the kitchen decide to walk in on its own?" Laughter followed, sharp, hushed, like knives wrapped in silk. A young woman in Dior murmured, "I thought she was staff. Who let her walk into the main lawn dressed like that?" Evelyn heard them, but she didn't stop walking. Richard Montgomery, the father of the bride, acknowledged her with a slight nod. No handshake, no greeting, just another passerby. The rest of the Montgomery clan followed suit. Silent appraisals, polite detours in conversation whenever she drew near. Michael, standing on the veranda chatting with friends, caught sight of her. A flicker crossed his face. Not shame, but pain. He saw exactly what was happening, and Evelyn met his gaze, calm and steady. Her lips pressed together, but her eyes said everything. "Not yet, my dear. Some lessons need time to be learned." Olivia stood radiant in the garden. Her smile had been rehearsed 100 times in the mirror and now sat perfectly on her face. With her fitted wedding dress, elegant French twist, and soft Dior fragrance, she was the epitome of a high society bride. And yet, when Evelyn walked in, a flicker of hesitation crossed her eyes. She wanted to run to her, but from the entrance hall, her mother stood watching, arms crossed, gaze like a tether. Olivia looked back at Evelyn, then turned away. She asked the photographer to change angles, retaking her place with a smile that no longer felt like her own. As the celebration went on, the dismissiveness grew clearer. When Evelyn sat down, some guests subtly pushed their chairs away. When she tried to make small talk, she was met with clipped replies or cold silence. At one point, when Evelyn reached for an hors d'oeuvre, Victoria didn't even try to hide her distaste. Michael winced, but he knew. His grandmother was stronger than all of them. She had faced people like this her entire life, and walked through fire with grace. What the Montgomerys didn't know, what they were about to find out, was that Evelyn Carter was not just another elderly guest. And tonight, they would find themselves on their knees, asking for forgiveness from the very woman they tried to shame. Under the canopy of ancient oaks strung with crystal lights that shimmered like stars, the wedding had reached its liveliest hour. Soft violin melodies weaved between the clink of champagne glasses and refined laughter, the kind of soundscape only found at a wedding of the elite. At the heart of the reception, women in silk couture traded compliments laced with subtle jabs, name-dropping luxury brands as if staking their place on a social ladder. Every tilt of the head, every delicate toast was carefully measured, nothing left to chance. And somewhere off to the side, Evelyn Carter moved quietly among the tables, searching for an empty seat. A man, just about to pull out a chair for his girlfriend, paused when he noticed Evelyn approaching. Without missing a beat, he redirected. "There's more shade over at that table. You like the breeze, don't you?" Then gently led her away, leaving Evelyn standing alone. No one told her she wasn't welcome, but the way eyes glanced and then quickly looked away, the way people shifted their bodies, the way the faint scent of smoke and old kitchens trailed behind her like something they didn't want to breathe in. All of it said more than words ever could. Eventually, Evelyn found an empty chair near the serving station, beside a side buffet meant for staff. It was just outside the golden glow of the main lights, a corner where the music arrived only as a distant echo, and the cheerful laughter felt like it belonged to a world far away. She sat down, back straight as always, her hand resting lightly on an old worn purse. No one looked her way. A young server passed by, barely out of his teens, with warm brown skin and a slightly rumpled white shirt and black bow tie. He slowed down. "Can I get you anything, ma'am?" he asked, voice sincere, one of the only honest tones she'd heard all evening. Evelyn smiled. "A glass of water, please, no ice, and, if you can, hold on to that kindness. Don't let this world wear it down." He nodded, eyes quietly shining, then slipped away. And in that moment, in the soft shadows of a forgotten table, Evelyn Carter was not small. She was simply unseen, for now, but she had lived long enough to know those who chase glitter often have short memories, until someone comes along and makes them remember. The wedding continued, its refined string quartet playing on endlessly, like a background score carefully chosen to fill the uneasy silences between performative conversations. A silver-haired woman leaned toward her companion, her voice soft but deliberately audible. "Who is that older lady, dressed like she just stepped out of someone's kitchen?" The other guest gave Evelyn a passing glance and chuckled. "No idea. Maybe the groom's cook, or a very friendly neighbor." A shrug followed, brief, indifferent, as if the topic wasn't worth the space in their thoughts. No one at that table knew, nor cared to know, that the woman in question was the groom's grandmother. The very woman who had raised Michael through meals stretched thin, winters without proper heat, and nights spent counting coins to afford his place in the city school system. At the head table, Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother, gracefully turned her glass of red wine in one hand. Her makeup was flawless, her lips the color of ripe plum, and her hair swept into a proud updo, as if she herself were the center of the celebration. Her eyes moved from Michael, the man her daughter had chosen, to Evelyn, sitting alone at the far end of the venue, hands folded neatly in her lap, gaze calm and unwavering. Victoria leaned toward a close friend, her tone even and poised, as though discussing global finance. Olivia was raised with standards, taught to know the difference between refinement and routine. It's unfortunate, really, that she chose to marry into modesty. The friend gave a rehearsed gasp. "Victoria, come now." But Victoria smiled and gently cut her off. "I'm not judging. I'm simply disappointed." Just a few feet away, Olivia and Michael had heard every word. Michael's hand tightened around hers. "We should go to her," he said quietly. Olivia didn't respond right away. Her eyes searched his, then scanned the scene around them. The cameras were still rolling. A full media crew was filming for a curated social reel, meant for upper circle platforms. She hesitated. Maybe, a little later, once everything settles down. Michael said nothing, but something behind his eyes dimmed, just a little. Olivia felt it. It hurt, but not enough, not yet, to make her leave the safety of the spotlight. Evelyn sat there, quietly, like a shadow cast in a place that glittered far more than necessary. Not because she felt out of place, but because in the eyes of those around her, there had never been a place for someone like her to begin with. She didn't react to the whispers behind her back. They weren't new. Nothing at this wedding was truly new to Evelyn, except the polished coat of wealth painted over something she'd known all her life, disdain, dressed up in polite smiles. The string ensemble shifted to a soft classical waltz, elegant and soothing, as if trying to smooth over the awkward silences no one dared to name. But for Evelyn, the music only took her back to a night long ago. A rainy night. She had been 23, a housemaid in a mansion north of Boston. That evening, she was scrubbing floors with soapy water mixed from cheap dish detergent. The sharp scent still clung to her hands when she carried tea into the parlor. There was a party. She wasn't invited, of course, but she still had to walk through silk gowns and polished leather shoes, going about her work as if she didn't exist. As she passed by a table, a blonde woman by the sofa gave a short laugh. Careful, or the onion smell might rub off on the linens. Her voice was sweet as honey, but every word was dipped in acid. Her husband burst out laughing. No one noticed Evelyn standing behind the curtains minutes later, waiting for the crowd to thin, before she silently moved again, invisible as ever. And now, decades later, she found herself in another party. Brighter lights, more expensive dresses, but the whispers were the same. Probably the groom's cook. No, she looks too frumpy. Maybe an old neighbor of the family. You can smell the past on her. She didn't get angry. She simply sat still, eyes closing for a brief moment before opening again, gaze unshaken. Not bitter, just clear. At the main table, the bride sat between her mother and her aunt, and across the venue, at the small, flowerless table near the kitchen, sat Evelyn. No lighting, no decoration, just her, hands resting neatly in her lap, posture steady. Olivia glanced toward her. She was sitting alone, but Olivia knew. That calm didn't mean acceptance. It meant familiarity. She remembered the afternoon tea at Michael's place, when Evelyn had baked pastries herself and brought them over. She remembered being slightly put off by the faint smell of wood smoke clinging to the crust. She had smiled, thanked her, but already decided to put them straight into the fridge, just for later. Now, every one of those little actions seemed to be lining up in front of her, demanding to be seen. From across the room, Michael turned his head. He, too, saw Evelyn, but he didn't step forward. Not because he was afraid, but because of the look she'd given him earlier. So steady, so composed, as if she were holding his strength for him so he wouldn't have to. Evelyn lifted her glass of water. She wasn't thirsty. She just needed something to hold, so her hands wouldn't tremble. Because yes, she was disappointed, not by the whispers, but by Olivia. The bride-to-be, the woman she had once hoped for, still hadn't said a word. Silence. That was the cruelest cut of all. So Evelyn remained seated, surrounded by soft shadows, distant strings, and an isolation thicker than all the perfume in the air. But she didn't shrink. She didn't lower her gaze. She didn't retreat, because she knew it is not the gaze of others that defines you. It is the unshaken silence you hold when their scorn grows loud that reveals the dignity of a soul they once overlooked, but never broke. At a table just across the courtyard, an older man sat in stillness, his hands loosely folded on the table as if he were reading a book with his eyes alone. His charcoal gray suit didn't stand out among the shimmering fabrics and silk ties worn by the other gentlemen. But there was something about him that made people glance twice. A calm presence, solid and unmoved, like bedrock beneath the surface of a noisy, polished stream. His silver hair was cropped clean. His face was square and steady, his posture upright like an old oak that had never once bent to the wind. On his wrist, an old mechanical watch, its golden trim long since worn away. Not the kind you show off, the kind you wear because nothing else carries its weight and meaning. And under the soft spill of sunset through the oak leaves above, his eyes, deep and bright, held the quiet sharpness of someone who had seen more seasons of life than of fashion. His name was William Carter. He didn't speak. He didn't raise a glass. He just sat there, watching the woman alone at the edge of the wedding lawn, only a few paces away. Evelyn Carter, the woman who had once held his hand as they walked to the public library when he was 8, who'd taught him to sound out menus from greasy diners, who'd nursed his fever with mashed ginger and coin-scraping when the heating went out in their rented flat. She wasn't his mother by blood, but she was the only one who'd ever seen worth in him when the world saw nothing but a stained collar and second-hand shoes. Now she sat alone, treated like a scratch on the canvas of perfection that the Montgomery family had so carefully painted. And William saw every detail. He saw the way Evelyn was overlooked by the champagne server, while the women beside her were asked, 3 times, how they liked their ice. He saw the way a young woman changed tables the moment Evelyn tried to sit beside her. He saw Evelyn's hands in her lap, fingers curled ever so slightly. Not from cold, but from the effort it took to keep them from trembling. And he saw, most of all, the way eyes shifted around her. Not with confrontation, but with the uneasy need to pretend she wasn't there. A well-dressed woman passed his table, leaned slightly, and whispered, voice light as dew, but sharp as glass. Such a shame. Did no one tell her to change? She smells like burnt firewood, and still had the nerve to show up. The man beside her chuckled. I honestly thought she wandered out of the kitchen staff entrance. Can't believe she's sitting out here. William didn't respond. He simply turned his head, gaze still locked on Evelyn. She sat straight, shoulders open, spine tall, but William knew it was this silence that cut the deepest. He had seen Evelyn angry. He'd seen her cry, rare, but it had happened. He'd seen her raise her voice, seen her stand between him and the kids who mocked him in the tenement courtyard. But this stillness was rare and cold. His memory drifted to a day long ago. He was 13. A man in the apartment next door had sneered at him and said, "You're just some nobody clinging to the skirts of a poor woman." Right in front of Evelyn. She hadn't argued. She'd simply walked him inside, set down a bowl of noodles, and began washing dishes. It wasn't until he finally asked, "Aren't you mad?" She'd smiled. "I don't have time to be mad at people who don't understand worth." And now, she was saying that again, not with words, but with every breath she took at this wedding. William looked out across the crowd. The faces deep in conversation. Deals, portfolios, luxury travel, overseas accounts. They didn't see it. They didn't feel it. That a woman of immense dignity was being made invisible. In the very glow of a life she had sacrificed her own comfort to help build. And then his gaze settled on a face. Victoria Montgomery. She was smiling, a flawless social smile. But William could see it. The smile of a woman who believed she was in full control. That if she dressed right, sat in the right place, laughed at the right time, nothing could touch her status. William tilted his head, slowly turning his eyes back to Evelyn. She didn't look his way, but he knew. She had always known. And beneath the red-gold shimmer of sunset caught in his glass, William Carter took a deep breath. It was time. This wedding was about to change hands. Amid the drifting laughter and classical music that floated across the garden like morning mist, the wedding continued at its elegant pace, measured, polished, and perfectly in line with the standards of high society. At the center, conversations about Spanish real estate, biotech investments, and Swiss ski holidays swirled on, uninterrupted, untouched, as if no outside truth could ever pierce this gilded circle. Silk dresses still flowed, champagne still tilted in golden light, and smiles, if anything, had grown more frequent ever since Evelyn had arrived. Until Dash. The event coordinator stepped onto the stage. Simple black gown, silver microphone in hand. Her eyes swept lightly across the crowd before she offered a graceful nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice calm and crisp, the kind you'd expect from someone hired for million-dollar weddings. "Before we raise our glasses to this beautiful couple, allow me to introduce a very special guest of honor." A ripple moved across the garden, like someone had dropped a stone into water that had been far too still. A figure whose vision and tireless work have shaped global finance and education as we know it. Chatter died, postures straightened, men adjusted their collars, women smoothed their dresses, glasses were lifted in anticipation, eyes scanned the space, trying to locate the important guest about to rise. Names began to murmur through the air. Harrison Martin? Maybe Devereaux, the energy CEO from Europe? Could be someone from the Alton Investment Fund? Victoria Montgomery tilted her head ever so slightly. Her deep red lips curled with satisfaction as her eyes swept across the guests like a queen surveying her court. She loved this. The names, the whispers, the expectation. After all, the evening was still going exactly as it should. And then, from a table tucked at the edge of the lawn, the one no one had paid much attention to, William Carter stood. No applause, no welcome, because no one knew who he was. At first, they assumed he was approaching the stage, but instead he turned, steadily, deliberately, and began walking in the opposite direction, toward a lone table beneath the oak trees, where a woman sat, alone. Her hand still rested gently on a water glass. Her eyes hadn't moved toward the stage. Her calm had never left her, not once during this entire evening. William reached her. He leaned down and took her fragile, weathered hands in his. "Mom," he said, just loud enough for her to hear, but somehow loud enough for everyone to fall silent. "Thank you for never looking away, no matter how far I went." Evelyn looked up, not surprised, only a soft nod, as if she had known this moment would come, not because she wished it would, but because she never doubted it deserved to. The entire garden froze. Victoria blinked at William, wineglass midair. Richard Montgomery turned to his wife, saying nothing. Olivia stood completely still, her eyes flicking between Evelyn, the man who had just called her Mom, and the rising wave of shame climbing up her throat. William straightened. His gaze swept over the crowd, those sitting, those standing, those holding their breath, trying to understand what was happening. "I'm William Carter," he said. No microphone, no spotlight, but his voice rang through the garden like a church bell striking marble. A man near the center table squinted. "William Carter," he whispered. A woman beside him paled. "That can't be." William didn't wait for them to figure it out. "Some of you might know my name, from portfolios, from scholarships, from newspaper articles, but if you want to know who I really am," he turned back toward Evelyn, "there's only one person here who truly knows. This woman, Evelyn Carter, the woman who picked me up from a street corner when I was 10. No family, no home, no future. She had no bank account, no car, no degree." He paused, took a breath, not from nerves, but from the weight of standing in a room lined with ghosts of memory. But she had two things: a heart that sacrificed and a faith that never broke. And with those two things, she raised me into the man standing before you. Silence, not a word, not a breath. Somewhere, a crystal glass slipped from someone's hand, shattering on the stone floor. No one turned to look. She never stood on a stage, never received an award, never got a thank you in public, but tonight, on the wedding day of the grandson she loves more than life, she was treated as if she didn't belong. He turned to face the Montgomerys' table. Maybe because she doesn't wear Chanel. Maybe because she doesn't walk in Versace. Or maybe because you didn't know who she was. He paused, then turned back to Evelyn, his voice softening. "But I know, Mom. I've never forgotten. And today, I won't let anyone forget again." No one spoke. No one had to. Because the silence, the weapon this entire evening had used to erase Evelyn, had just been shattered. Not with rage, not with spectacle, but with gratitude, from a man who once had nothing, but never once lost his sense of worth. William's words fell over the garden like an unexpected storm. Not loud, not violent, but enough to strip away every layer of false security that the people here had wrapped themselves in. The silence that followed wasn't born out of politeness. It came from something deeper, a blow straight to the conscience, That thing so many of them had sealed behind glass cases to make more room for status, image, and anything that came with the price tag. No one laughed. No one raised a glass. No one exclaimed, "That was so moving," the way they often did when watching feel-good stories on TV. Because this time, they were not spectators of the tragedy. They were the authors of it. A woman, seated near the stage, clutched her purse a little tighter, her eyes locked on Evelyn with clear discomfort. A well-dressed couple bowed their heads slightly, lips pressed shut, as if afraid even the sound of their breath might shatter what little dignity they had left. Someone opened their mouth, perhaps to apologize, to make light of the moment, to change the subject, but nothing came out, not for lack of words, but because they knew any word spoken now would ring hollow. Evelyn still sat there. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She wasn't proud, nor was she humbled. She was simply still. And it was that stillness that made everyone lower their gaze. Not before power, but before a kind of strength none of them had ever mastered. The way she rested her hands on the table, steady, unmoved. The way she looked at William, not surprised, not performative. The way she met hundreds of eyes without flinching even once. William stood beside her. His eyes no longer carried the steel from earlier. They had softened, full of love and also full of anger. Not the kind aimed at any single person, but the kind that had built up over years, against a system that teaches people to dismiss those who don't play the game. "She didn't go to Harvard," he continued, voice calm and unshaken. "She didn't win a Fulbright. She doesn't have powerful connections. But she taught me more than any professor I've ever known. She taught me that compassion isn't something you preach. It's something you practice, even when no one's watching." His eyes scanned the crowd, one face at a time. "And today, you all saw it." His gaze landed on Victoria. "And I hope you never forget the version of yourselves that you saw in this very moment." Victoria sat frozen. The kind of frozen that happens not from shock, but from running out of things to hold on to. The mask had slipped, and she no longer knew how to fix it. She was simply a woman sitting in the shell of someone who once believed she belonged on a higher tier, and now couldn't even stand to acknowledge a woman who once cleaned floors. Richard leaned back in his chair, hand over his chest, eyes blank as they stared off toward the trees. He said nothing, but inside a single question echoed. How many times have I dismissed someone like her just because she didn't look like me? And Olivia? She looked at Evelyn, then at William, then somewhere deep within herself. Images began flooding back, small, forgettable moments, now impossible to ignore. The time Evelyn gave her a box of homemade cookies wrapped in old newspaper, and she smiled politely but placed it aside like she didn't want to touch it. The time Evelyn asked if she was cold, and she replied, "No, I've got a jacket, thank you." The time Evelyn arrived early to help clean up before a gathering, and she left her sitting alone while she posed for perfect party photos. Back then, she told herself, she's sweet. She won't take it personally. And now, she realized Evelyn never took it personally, not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to forgive without needing an apology. Regret swelled inside her, rising like rainwater about to spill off an old roof. She turned away, but couldn't hide the tear that slipped down her cheek. William bowed once more, this time deeply, not for the crowd, just for her. He took her hand and gave it a gentle squeeze. a squeeze that said, "I waited too long to say this, and you waited a lifetime to hear it," from the right person, in the right place, at the right moment. Evelyn closed her hand around his, and in that single motion, the entire room, once so certain of its own importance, suddenly realized they had been standing outside a story they never understood. A breeze drifted through the garden, lifting the hem of Olivia's white dress. The sheer curtains swayed and brushed against each other, whispering a truth everyone now felt. This moment will not return. The woman they had once chosen to overlook was still there, not raising her voice, not demanding her place, because she didn't need to be seen to have value. It was they, who were just now learning how to truly look. Victoria leaned back in her chair as if someone had just pulled away her sense of control. Her lips were pressed tight, but the deep red couldn't mask the pale hue creeping from her cheeks down to her collarbone. Each swallow became harder, because what was stuck in her throat wasn't emotion, but the fear of losing her grip. Richard sat beside her in silence. The wine in his glass rippled, untouched. He didn't dare sip, nor set it down. His hand gripped the stem like it held the last piece of dignity he could still claim, fragile and slowly slipping. A few guests glanced at one another. Someone tugged nervously at their tie. Another bent down to retrieve a napkin that didn't need picking up, searching for any excuse to step away from the quiet unraveling unfolding in broad daylight. No one whispered. No one dared, because by now, even the smallest comment would reveal just how complicit they'd been in their early silence. And then, from the very air that once buzzed with pride and polish, a voice rose, low, steady, and unmistakably clear. "Tonight," Michael began, standing among the confusion of tailored suits and darting eyes, "many of you were worried my grandmother would ruin the image of this celebration." He paused, eyes moving slowly across the front rows, not with blame, not with bitterness, just with clarity, like holding up a mirror in the middle of the room. "But the truth is, she's the only person here who never needed an image. She never needed a spotlight or a name printed in gold foil on an invitation or a hashtag attached to a designer brand. She created her own worth, something many of us in this room are still trying to borrow." Victoria opened her mouth, perhaps to respond, but stopped. No one looked to her for direction anymore. No eyes believed in the safety of her silence. Michael turned to Olivia, his wife, who had remained quiet too long. She was crying, silently but clearly. The tears ran down her face faster than she could wipe them away. He nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. A message passed without words. "I know, but we can't keep living like this." He faced the crowd again. "We talk about dignity, about class, about what makes people different. But no one asks, who truly defines that difference? The person seated at the head table, or the one who spent her whole life building someone from nothing?" He looked toward Evelyn. She hadn't moved, but her eyes now held a warmth too real to ignore. "She didn't ruin this event," he continued, his voice gaining edge. "The way you treated her, that's what exposed the rot in this illusion of status so many of you cling to like a family heirloom." A hush rolled across the garden. No one moved, but every word Michael spoke was peeling away another layer of the masks they'd been wearing all afternoon. At one table, a middle-aged man slowly nodded. A young woman bit her lip, eyes wet, realizing she had smirked when Evelyn walked past. Michael paused, exhaled, then spoke again. Softer, his voice touched with something raw. I grew up in a home where smoke clung to our clothes, where dinner was sometimes just boiled potatoes and salt. But in that same home, I learned what money could never teach, that real love doesn't need to be displayed, and real pride doesn't come from fancy laughs. He looked back at Evelyn. With every step I took, every time I fell, you were the one who stayed. And if anyone here still doesn't know who you are, then let me make it clear, one last time. He stood taller. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the space. You are the pillar of this family, and anyone who can't see that doesn't belong in it. This time, the silence that followed wasn't from shock. It was from people, finally beginning to listen. The air in the garden seemed to thicken. No breeze, no refined murmurs from the upper class, just a heavy silence, as if everyone was waiting for a reaction from the woman they had ignored from the very first moment. Victoria blinked, trying to steady her breath. For the first time in years, she felt empty. The sharp phrases she so often used to guide conversations at social events failed her now. She set her wine glass down and leaned slightly toward Evelyn, her face still attempting softness, though her lips trembled. I didn't know," she stammered, her voice cracking like a wire pulled too tight. "If I had known you were William's mother, I would have." She didn't finish, because Evelyn's eyes, not angry, not condescending, were enough. Evelyn gave a small nod as if unsurprised by the excuse. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, even, deliberate, each word stripped through the layers of civility like a blade. "I didn't need you to know," she said. "I just needed you to act like a human being." No shouting, no condemnation, but the weight of that sentence made it hard for Victoria to breathe. Because in a world where everything is excused by not knowing, Evelyn demanded no awareness, only the simplest thing anyone should offer: decency. Victoria froze, lips parting as if to speak, but nothing came. Her eyes darted around, searching for something, someone to hold on to. But now, no one met her gaze. Richard, who had been silent until now, stood. His face remained composed, but the certainty in his eyes had faded. He walked toward Evelyn and extended a hand, polite, practiced, the kind he had offered to countless powerful men. "Madam Carter," he began, "if I may say, it would be an honor." Evelyn didn't let him finish. She turned away. His hand hung in the air, waiting for a grasp that never came. What he received instead was the cold stillness of refusal. It wasn't a rejection. It was how Evelyn ended a conversation she never asked to be part of. Slowly, Richard lowered his hand. He didn't lift his head, and in that moment, the man who had once sat at the head of every prestigious table understood something new. Not everyone needs power to make you bow. The guests remained silent. No one blamed Evelyn. No one asked her to forgive, because everyone understood. She didn't need an apology to be dignified. She had already carried herself with grace the moment she stepped into the garden, in her faded dress and the scent of kitchen smoke that once seemed out of place. Only now were they finally clear-eyed enough to see it. Michael stood quietly behind her, eyes glistening. Olivia gently squeezed his hand, not just to say sorry for herself, but for a generation taught to judge by fabric and fragrance. And Evelyn returned to her seat as if she had never left, hands resting in her lap, eyes turned toward the garden. The party wasn't over, but the story had turned a new page. No one said a word, but something unmistakable had begun to happen. One by one, guests who had once crowded close to the Montgomery table, treating it as the most coveted spot at the event, quietly stood up. There was no rush, no grand gesture. But a silent understanding had settled among those who had once dismissed Evelyn that true presence isn't found under the spotlight, but in the place their conscience could no longer ignore. The first to move was an elderly woman in a deep velvet dress. She didn't bow, and she didn't offer apologies. She simply placed a trembling hand on Evelyn's shoulder and whispered, "I know I looked without truly seeing, but now I see." Evelyn looked up. Her eyes weren't cold, weren't distant, just steady, so painfully steady it made people ashamed not because she punished them, but because she didn't need to. Next came a middle-aged couple. They approached as if stepping into a classroom for the first time. The man bowed low. The woman gently took Evelyn's hand. They said nothing, because they knew no words would be enough. And so it continued. One by one, guests left the glittering Montgomery table, once the centerpiece of the celebration, now looking more like an outdated showroom. Victoria and Richard remained seated, alone beneath the crystal lights, like forgotten mannequins left behind after an exhibition had closed. No one looked to them anymore. No one faked a laugh to match their glasses. And perhaps the most painful part for them wasn't being ignored. It was being seen through, as if they had never truly mattered at all. Richard glanced around, searching for something to hold on to, but his eyes landed only on cold, empty space. The wine glass in his hand was finally set down, not because he had finished it, but because there was nothing left to raise. Victoria looked at Evelyn, her expression a mixture of fatigue and bitterness. But she didn't rise. She didn't move. She knew that at this moment, anything she did would only expose the one truth she had tried to hide, who carried real grace and who had only worn a mask. Olivia sat beside Michael, her hands laced in his. Her eyes were wet, but not from shock or shame anymore. This time it was gratitude, delayed far too long. She whispered, voice breaking, "I was wrong. I let them disrespect someone I owe everything to." Michael said nothing. He only squeezed her hand, tightly. His eyes remained on Evelyn, the woman who raised him with unconditional love, with lessons so deeply rooted they didn't need repeating, with silence when it was right, and a voice only when it mattered most. Now, she didn't have to say or do anything. She simply sat beneath the dazzling lights of the garden and allowed everything to fall back into place. Those who once sat at the front were now gathering around her, not to be seen, but to remember what it meant to be human again. And the Montgomery table, still draped in lace, still surrounded by fine wine, was nothing more than a long bench for those who had once mistaken themselves as the center. No one was kicked out. No one was shouted at. No one was punished. The truth had entered, and everything false quietly stepped aside. Michael still held Olivia's hand, not to comfort her, but as if making a new vow. He no longer looked at the crowd, nor at his in-laws, still frozen in their seats at the edge of the garden. His eyes were fixed on one person, the woman who had taught him how to stand tall, even when the world looked down. "It's all right," he said, his voice low but steady. "But from now on, we don't stay silent anymore." Olivia nodded gently, tears still clinging to her lashes. She didn't say, "I promise," because promises, in this moment, weren't enough. Her eyes said more, eyes that were finally seeing Evelyn not as a guest, but as a root she'd once overlooked. Evelyn looked at them, her gaze soft but unyielding. "We stay silent to keep the peace," she said, as if reciting a truth forged through a lifetime of restraint. "But action is what changes a generation." Michael swallowed hard, and for the first time Olivia reached for Evelyn's hand, not out of duty but from genuine respect. The last rays of sunlight slipped through the leaves overhead, casting a warm glow across Evelyn's face. She didn't shimmer from makeup or jewels, but she radiated, because in that moment she became a mirror no one could look away from. Someone began to clap, hesitant at first, then growing. A wave of applause spread, not to celebrate, but to redeem, not to flatter, but to acknowledge the silence that had once held them captive. Beyond the garden, dusk had begun to settle. The wedding wasn't officially over, but everyone knew a different kind of ceremony had begun, not between two people, but between two ways of thinking, one that worshipped appearance and one that honored truth. And today, one woman, smelling faintly of wood smoke, dressed in a faded blouse, seated quietly in the corner, had proved something many had forgotten. Class doesn't come from what we wear or where we sit. It has no scent, no label. It doesn't need to be introduced. True class lives in how we carry ourselves and in how we make others reflect on who they are. As the garden lights flickered on to replace the sun, Evelyn remained at her table, calmly scooping the last bite of strawberry mousse from her plate, unrushed, unbothered. She never needed to rise above anyone to be remembered. That night, as the chairs were cleared and the lights dimmed, no one spoke of the wine list or the best-dressed guest. They spoke of the old woman who smelled like firewood, who never raised her voice, but made the whole world listen, who never stepped onto the stage, but brought the powerful to their feet. She didn't demand attention. She didn't need the spotlight. She simply existed, humble enough to be dismissed and profound enough to make people ashamed of how shallow they'd become. Because some people we only truly see after we've stepped on their light for far too long. So, now I ask you, what truly defines a person's class? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because maybe, just maybe, your story might be the light someone else needs. And if you believe this story deserves to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe, so the next time truth, kindness, and dignity speak, you'll be right there to hear them.